The morning Dennis retired, he made himself a pot of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened a spreadsheet on his laptop. "I've been thinking," he said without looking up. "Now that we're both home, we should consolidate, simplify things." I was standing at the counter cutting an apple. I remember the sound of the knife on the cutting board. I remember thinking, he just got home. He's been retired for exactly 11 hours. "Simplify what?" I asked. "The accounts. 2 people, 4 accounts. It doesn't make sense. We're wasting money on fees." I set down the knife. "My teacher's pension goes into my account, Dennis. It always has." He finally looked up. Not angry, not raised voice. Just that patient, measured look he'd been giving me for the past few years, the one that made me feel like I was a student who hadn't quite understood the lesson. "Margaret," he said, "I'm a retired accountant. I think I know how to manage household finances." And that was that. Or at least, that's how Dennis saw it. I want to tell you who I was before that morning, because I think it matters. I taught grade 4 and 5 at Ridgemont Elementary in Ottawa for 31 years. I raised report cards, organized field trips to the Museum of Nature, stayed late marking math tests while Dennis was working late at his firm downtown. We raised our son Patrick, who now lives in Vancouver with his wife and 2 little girls I mostly see on FaceTime. I am 64 years old. I have a pension from the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan that I contributed to for 3 decades. It is mine. I earned every single dollar of it standing in front of a chalkboard and then a whiteboard and then a smartboard, explaining fractions to 8-year-olds who would rather have been anywhere else. I want you to understand that, because what happened next took me almost 2 years to fully recognize for what it was. It started the way I imagine it always starts, with something that sounds reasonable. Dennis had been managing our investments since the late 90s. He was good at it. He liked it. The plan to merge our checking accounts into one joint account at TD, with Dennis as the primary account holder, was presented to me with a color-coded spreadsheet showing our monthly expenses and a breakdown of how much we'd save on monthly fees. $12 a month, $144 a year. "Think of it as a little vacation fund," he said, and smiled. I signed the paperwork on a Tuesday afternoon in February. The snow was coming down hard outside the bank on Bank Street. Our advisor, a young man who couldn't have been more than 30, walked us through the forms. I remember he had a small Canadian flag pin on his lapel. I remember thinking, this is fine. This is just admin. This is just paperwork. What I did not understand until much later was that I had just handed Dennis the key to a cage I didn't yet know I was walking into. The first time he questioned me, it was about a trip to Chapters, $23.50. I'd bought a novel for myself and a board game for Patrick's older daughter Lily, whose birthday was coming up. "What's this charge?" Dennis asked. He'd taken to reviewing the joint account statement every evening after dinner, laptop open on the coffee table while the news played in the background. "Books," I said, "and a gift for Lily. You could have ordered it online. Amazon has the same thing for less. I like going to Chapters." He looked at me for a moment. "It's just not efficient, Margaret." I said nothing. It was $23. But the next week, it was $31 at the Rideau Center, a birthday lunch with my friend Carol, who I'd known since our first year teaching together at Ridgemont in 1993. And the week after that, it was $14 at a coffee shop near the canal, where I'd gone to read on a Sunday afternoon because the house felt very small and very quiet, and Dennis was at his computer running numbers on something I was never fully told about. "You went out for coffee? Just to sit there?" "I like the atmosphere," I said. "We have a coffee maker," he said, "a very good one." By spring, I had developed a habit of bracing myself before he opened the laptop in the evenings. I would sit across from him with my own book, and I would track from the corner of my eye the moment his scrolling slowed down. That was the tell. When the scrolling slowed, he'd found something. "What's this $90 at MEC?" I needed new walking shoes. My old ones were worn through. "You should have told me. We could have gone together and found something on sale." I looked up from my book. "Dennis, they're my shoes." "It's our money, Margaret." There it was. That was the sentence that changed things. Not a shout, not a threat, just 6 words delivered in the tone of a man explaining something obvious to someone who should already know it. "It's our money, Margaret." And somehow, slowly, without my consent or even my awareness, that sentence became the operating principle of our household. By the fall of that year, Dennis's second year of retirement, my first, I was being given an allowance. He didn't call it that. He called it personal spending. $100 every 2 weeks, transferred from the joint account to a KOHO card he'd set up for me, which he could monitor in real time from his phone. $100 every 2 weeks for a 63-year-old woman who had spent 31 years educating other people's children. I want you to sit with that for a moment. He had a golf membership at Emerald Links that cost $1,200 a year. He had a home workshop in the garage full of tools I'd never seen him use. He bought a new driver in September, $380 because the previous one wasn't performing. He drove to Tim Hortons every single morning for a large double-double and a breakfast sandwich, and he thought nothing of it because he handled the accounts, and he had decided, apparently, that his spending made sense, and mine needed to be supervised. When I mentioned to him calmly, I thought that $100 bi-weekly wasn't enough to cover even basic personal things, he pulled up the spreadsheet again. What are you spending it on? Toiletries, gifts, the occasional coffee with Carol, normal things. Show me your receipts. I stared at him. I beg your pardon? If you're running out, I need to understand where the money is going. It's basic accounting. I am not exaggerating when I say that I sat at that kitchen table for a long time after he said that, unable to speak. Not because I was afraid of him. Dennis was never physically frightening, and I want to be clear about that. But because I recognized in that moment that somewhere between the spreadsheet on the day he retired and that Tuesday evening in October, I had become a person who needed to justify buying hand cream to her husband. I called Carol the next day from the backyard because I'd noticed Dennis had started appearing in whatever room I was making phone calls in. I walked to the far end of the garden, past the bird feeders, and told her everything. Carol was quiet for a long time. "Margaret," she said finally, "that's not budgeting, that's control." "He was an accountant," I said. "He says it's just—" "I know what he says it is," Carol said, "but I'm telling you what it is." That was the first time someone had said the word to me plainly. Control. Not financial planning, not efficiency. Control. And once she said it, I couldn't unhear it. But I still didn't leave. Not then. Because leaving, when you're 63 years old, and you've been married for 37 years, and your name is no longer on an active account, and your pension flows directly into a joint account, your husband monitors every evening. Leaving is not as simple as deciding to leave. It requires planning. It requires what I can only describe as a very specific kind of quiet bravery that doesn't look brave at all, because it happens in small, invisible increments over a very long time. It started with Carol. She works part-time now at the Ottawa Public Library branch on Metcalfe Street. We'd been having lunch together every few weeks, always at places I paid for in cash because I had started withdrawing small amounts from the ATM at the Shoppers Drug Mart on my KOHO card, $20 here, $20 there, and keeping the bills folded inside a pocket of my winter coat that Dennis never touched, not because I had a plan yet, but because Carol's voice had planted something in me, and I was, without quite consciously deciding to, beginning to tend to it. In March, about 14 months after Dennis merged our accounts, I made an appointment with a financial advisor at a different bank, not our TD branch, a Scotiabank branch in Nepean, far enough from our neighborhood that I wouldn't run into anyone we knew. I told Dennis I was visiting an old colleague for lunch. I wore my good coat. The advisor's name was Sandra. She was around my age, maybe a year or two younger, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a direct manner that I found immediately reassuring. I explained my situation. I used the word Carol had given me, control. Sandra did not look surprised. She looked, if anything, like a woman who had heard this before. "You have legal entitlement to your pension income," she said. "Teachers' pension plan deposits can be redirected to any account in your name. You can open a personal account today. He cannot stop that. He'll see it on the joint account," I said, "when the pension stops depositing there." "Yes," she said, "he will, eventually. But by then, you'll have had time to prepare." I opened a personal account that afternoon. Checking and savings. I had it set up so that statements were paperless, accessible only through an email address I created that same day on my phone, through a browser I then deleted from my browsing history. I'm a retired school teacher, not a spy, but I had been living with an accountant for 37 years, and I had learned, without trying to, how systems work. I want to pause here and say something that I think is important. I did not want to leave my marriage in secret. That is not who I am. I had imagined, when I was younger, that if a marriage ended, it would end in honest conversation. That two adults who had built a life together could sit across a table and make decisions together with dignity. I still believe that is how it should work. But Dennis had, over the course of those 2 years, systematically made that impossible. He had made me financially dependent, and you have to be very quiet about it. By May, my pension had been redirected for 6 weeks. Dennis had not noticed yet, or if he had, he hadn't said anything. I suspect he noticed in early June, because he became quieter in a way that felt like gathering. But he said nothing, and I said nothing, and we continued to eat dinner across from each other while the news played in the background, and the laptop sat open on the coffee table, and I sat across from him with my book and my whole chest full of a plan. Carol had helped me find a transitional housing program through a women's support organization in Ottawa. I want to be careful here because these services have limited capacity, and I don't want to say more than is necessary, except that they exist and they are staffed by people of extraordinary patience and kindness, and if you are in a situation like mine, you can find them. They are there. I had a bag, not a suitcase that would have been noticed. A canvas tote from the Ottawa Farmers Market that I'd been slowly filling for weeks, kept at Carol's apartment, a change of clothes, my passport, my SIN card, my pension statement, the new bank card, a list of phone numbers written by hand on a piece of paper, not stored in my phone, because I did not trust that either. The Thursday I left, Dennis had a cardiology follow-up appointment at the Ottawa Heart Institute. His appointment was at 2 in the afternoon. He would be gone for at least 2 hours, sometimes longer depending on wait times. I had calculated this precisely because Dennis had been using a shared calendar app that I had access to, and for once I was grateful for his system. I made lunch before he left. Turkey on rye, the way he liked it, with a little grainy mustard. I don't know why I did that. I think I needed to do something ordinary. I needed the kitchen to feel like a kitchen, and not like the last room I would stand in as Dennis's wife. He left at 1:30. I stood at the window and watched his Subaru back out of the driveway. I waited until it turned the corner and disappeared. Then I called Carol. She was there in 12 minutes. I had the tote by the door. I took my coat from the hook in the front hall, the good wool coat, the one I'd worn to the Scotiabank branch in Nepean, the one with the pocket where I used to keep folded 20s. I put it on. I took one last look at the kitchen. At the coffee maker Dennis had referenced when I spent $14 at a cafe by the canal. At the laptop on the coffee table. At the spreadsheet I had never once been invited to help build. I closed the door behind me. Dennis called 47 times between 4 o'clock that afternoon and 11 o'clock that night. I know because I kept count. The next morning there were 19 more. Then, when I didn't answer any of them, the emails started. Long emails with subject lines like, "We need to discuss this rationally, and Margaret, I am very concerned." 14 emails in the first week. Some of them were angry. Some of them were, for the first time in longer than I could remember, almost tender. One of them ended with a line I've thought about many times since. I don't understand what I did wrong. I did not respond to that one either. Not because I was cruel, but because I had tried in small ways to tell him what he did wrong for 2 years, and he had met every attempt with a spreadsheet and a patient measured look. Some conversations have an expiry date. The transitional housing was in Centertown, a 15-minute walk from the Rideau River. I had my own room, small and clean, with a window that faced east and caught the morning light in a way I found unexpectedly consoling. There were 4 other women in the house and we ate breakfast together on weekday mornings. Eggs, toast, strong coffee, and we did not ask each other questions we weren't ready to answer, and I found, to my genuine surprise, that I was not nearly as alone as I had felt standing in my own kitchen for the past 2 years. I called Patrick from Carol's phone that first week. He was quiet for a long time when I told him. Then he said, "Mom, I didn't know it was that bad," and I realized that I had protected Dennis's image or maybe my own dignity so thoroughly that even my own son hadn't seen it clearly. "I knew something was off," Patrick said, "when you stopped calling as much." I had stopped calling as much because Dennis had started appearing in whatever room I was in when I used my phone, and eventually I had started finding reasons not to call at all. Patrick wanted to come home immediately. I told him to wait. I had things to figure out. I found a family lawyer through a referral from the women's organization, a woman who practiced in Ottawa and who specialized in cases exactly like mine. She explained that under Ontario's Family Law Act, I had entitlement to equalization of net family property. Dennis's golf membership, his workshop tools, the $380 driver, all of it went into the calculation. My 31 years of pension contributions, which he had been redirecting into his vision of our household finances, were not something he could simply claim. The law, she told me, was clearer than Dennis's spreadsheets. I'm not going to pretend the months that followed were easy. They weren't. There is a particular grief that comes not from losing someone you love, but from accepting that the person you thought you knew was, in some essential way, someone you had constructed out of hope and habit, and the enormous human need to believe that the person sleeping next to you for 37 years was fundamentally on your side. Dennis wasn't a monster. He was a man who needed control and never examined why, and I was a woman who loved him long enough to mistake that need for competence. But here is what I want to tell you. If you are reading this, and you recognize something in it, I have my own account now. My pension deposits into it on the 15th of every month, the same as it always did, except now I'm the only person who can see it. Last September, I went to Chapters and spent $41 on 2 novels and a journal, and I paid with my own card. And I walked out into the fall sunshine on Bank Street, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. And I did not brace for the evening, and I did not rehearse an explanation, and I did not feel like a student who hadn't understood the lesson. I felt like a 64-year-old woman who had spent 31 years educating children and who had, after a very long detour, remembered that she was also allowed to be a person. Patrick brought the girls to Ottawa at Christmas. Lily is 7 now, and she loves books the way I do. We went to Chapters together, the 3 of us, and she took a very long time choosing, the way children do, holding each book up and considering it very seriously, and I told her to take as long as she needed because we were in absolutely no hurry at all. If you are in a situation like mine, please know that financial control in a marriage is recognized in Canada as a form of domestic abuse. The Ontario government, as well as organizations in every province, have resources specifically for this. You do not have to be physically afraid to deserve help. You do not have to explain yourself to anyone before you are ready. And you are allowed to open a bank account. You are allowed to keep your own money. You earned it. It is never too late to find your way back to yourself.